I know it's been a minute, but I thought I'd take you through the piece I'm working on right now. So I have my sketch already done. The red parts are red col erase pencil like normal, and then obviously there's some graphite on top of there for a tighter drawing, and then I'm transferring it using my light box, but I realized that you can't see the sketch properly, and so I tried to make a copy of it with my scanner, and none of the red parts showed up, which I thought was really funny. But I realized if I just overlay this one on top, you can kind of see the face better with the watercolor paper. It probably is a little less visible in real life because the camera's really picking up the lights and darks with the light box, but yeah, I'm going to transfer this now, and then we'll get to painting. Hi guys, and welcome back. So this is the voiceover part of the video. First off, I'm just using my light box to layer those sketches and transfer them onto my 9x12 Canson XL watercolor paper. And for this piece, I decided to use a mechanical pencil just because I wanted a bit of a darker line, and I really wanted to play up like the watercolor look of this one, which will make sense once you see how I'm going about it for process, but normally I would suggest using a colored pencil just because it blends a little bit easier with the paint, but sometimes that line art look with the graphite is something you want to go for. Also, I really couldn't see those leaves and had to just reference it. Now we're going in and using a kneaded eraser just to lighten up the sketch, and also straightening out the shelves that I drew because apparently I didn't draw them straight the first time. But now we're going in and using a 1/2 inch just flat watercolor brush, wetting the whole piece of paper, and then using wet and wet techniques to start laying down the first layers of color on everything. For this piece, I really wanted to have an abstract sort of feel and make sure that everything kind of felt blendy, and so the wet and wet technique works really well for that. And everything was drying really fast, and so I actually did get some really cool dried edges in there too, especially in the prayer plant up on the top right, which I'm excited about. I think that's cool, and I think that's one of the next things I really want to work with in terms of watercolor technique, because I tend to do a lot of just blending or just dry, but working with those dry edges can give you some really interesting effects. Now I'm going in and laying in the first layer of background colors, and up on the left that's pink and the bottom it's blue, and then I'll be laying a single color over top of that to hopefully show that there are different colors underneath the different light sources. One of the things I didn't do a lot when I was first starting with watercolor is use different brushes, and gotta say, we're only in the third, fourth layer of this painting right now, and I've already used like 4 different brush sizes, so definitely say it's worth trying out different brushes and using them for different things, because it's not worth it, even though I really want to use my 3 round for everything, to struggle and have that be too big. This little baby brush right here, she comes through for me every time. I painted a lot of the portfolio pieces I did for when I was applying to art schools with this one. A lot of like the detail work and stuff, which those are still up on my channel if you haven't seen those yet. But yeah, there's something to be said for the blending ability of an incredibly tiny brush, and a big one for backgrounds. This piece was actually inspired by a thumbnail I made up in my last sketchbook video. I will have that up in the cards if you want to take a look at that. But it had been a minute since I had actually come up with a personal piece to do, just in general, and I came up with a thumbnail with a bunch of plants and a figure in the center, and kind of just went off of that. Now going in and doing those leaves, I'm trying to do a wet into wet technique on them, and while it does work in the end, I think again I was using too big of a brush, which was transferring too much water onto those leaves. Because I went in and did all of them the same, I do feel like that technique was successful, but if you are trying to do a striping sort of thing with the colors like I was trying to do, I would suggest using a brush that holds less water and just does that better for you. One of the things I experimented with over the summer was actually using alternative shadow colors, because for watercolor I taught myself to do it by using purple as the base color for everything, and really experimenting with a more reddish violet has added some dimension into the pieces that I did it with, so I did that here as well. I, as I said before, am doing different light sources for this one. It's more pink in the top left and blue in the bottom right. And so giving the figure those pink shadows, I really wanted to create a sense of interest, and using the darker, more desaturated purple in the deeper areas, hopefully to add some saturation and contrast. This table in the front here took a long time to layer up the way I wanted it to, too. A lot of the background and the blending of shadows is wet into wet blending, and I worked a lot with the color Moon Glow by Daniel Smith, given to me by my friend Ashley, and it's really wonderful because it does this great thing where it'll dry bluer in some places and purplier in others. I really don't know a whole heck of a lot about the technical terms for watercolor effects, but it really helped to sell that two light source effect and the two main colors of the piece. I guess I keep saying light source. What I mean more is overall color of the piece. Like if I was doing digitally, that would be like the kind of color cast to it, and I would probably do that on like an overlay or a multiply layer. But yeah, the whole vibe for this piece is that I wanted to kind of do something a little bit more abstract and kind of unreality sort of looking, you know what I mean? Like obviously still doing a realistic kind of rendering on the face, on the plants and stuff, but kind of giving it a sense of things that couldn't happen as far as light works in real life, which I really enjoyed doing. I also got to include my own plants in the piece. The one at the top right is my prayer plant, the bottom is a pothos that I have, and then there's my Sansevieria in the back, which I don't think I've ever done a realistic plant drawing before, like a watercolor one, and so that was really cool to do. But yeah, for the rest of this, I'm basically just hyping up the contrast and saturation on everything and making sure that those colors that I've chosen to be my main colors are incorporated everywhere in the piece. And then this was very mixed media based. One of the things I really wanted to do was have white eyelashes, which is actually inspired by like anime characters. I actually don't watch anime, but I've always loved that design aesthetic of having white eyelashes that like seem red around the edges. So I did that with my Prismacolor Color Erase colored pencils, and now I'm going over with those same pencils to do the line art and create definition in areas that are a little bit less defined because of the nature of the watercolor. And then down here on the plant, I'm using the blue, purple, and magenta ones. I have all the actual colors listed down below as always, but I was unsure of how I wanted that to be at first, and so I did render it a couple times, and because they are erasable, I was able to just erase it and try again. Here I'm referencing the plant on my phone to be able to add the line art in a way that makes sense. And I also didn't want to overdo the line art, which is why I'm using them in conjunction with actual rendering in pencil on the actual object. So it does have lines, yes, but they're not as harsh as something in like Blackline or Hatched or anything like that. Over here with the prayer plant, I did have to do quite a bit of definition in the pencils just because of the nature of the watercolor and the fact that I wasn't getting crisp enough edges. I actually could have used a smaller brush, but unfortunately that is the smallest brush that I own. If you've never heard of prayer plants before, I highly suggest looking them up as well because they unfurl and curl throughout the day to take in as much light as they need, and they do actually move. Not obviously to the visible eye, but if you set up a time-lapse camera, you can kind of see them dance, which is neat. I think relying on the colored pencils more heavily in this gave it a really interesting texture and sort of feel to it, which I really enjoyed. And one of my favorite ways to use the pencils is actually to put them down first and then blend them out with water, which you can see me doing here under the shadows of the plant leaves. They aren't watercolor pencils, but they do blend ever so slightly with the pigment. And I went over and blended everything out because I really enjoy the brighter version of the color that it makes when you do so. And I think it further helped to kind of make it feel like that colored light sort of setting. Now I'm going in with Copic Markers, and because these pencils don't have a super high wax content, you can actually color over them to a certain extent. Obviously, you're not coloring over every piece of the paper and whatnot, but I did use Copics over them, and they do blend those as well. Not as much as Watercolor does, but they do blend them slightly, so if you're trying to get a really crisp line art, that's something to watch out for. But now I'm going in and doing further rendering on the face. This character is actually supposed to look like they've been crying for a good hour and a half. So I did have like reference photos up for that, which was fun. And it was a really balanced sort of thing going on here. As you can see me taking forever to render out how much I wanted the blush to be, because I had been really careful to build that up in the first stages, and now that this was starting to look more realistic, which I was excited about, I didn't want to push it too far so that it was a caricature. For me, I think this piece is the most mixed media one I've made to date, and I feel like I made a really good use of all of the different tools and materials I have at my disposal. Because after this, you'll see me go in with gouache, which we haven't worked with on here in a little bit. But as you've seen me do before, I have used the white gel pen and water as a gouache before when I don't feel like getting out all of the gouache supplies, but I think gouache in and of itself is sometimes a little easier to use and a little less bright, if that makes any sense. As you can see, I'm blending it out here, and it's not quite as pigmented as the gel pen is, which is kind of the look I'm going for. I wanted to try and play up the translucency of skin as much as possible, and I feel like gouache really allows me to do that. Also, pro tip, I like to leave my gouache on a Hobby Lobby gift card from several years ago, and I just have a dot that's dried, and it keeps in my Copic case, and obviously I let it dry before putting it away again, but I always have it right there at my disposal, and then the area where I'm blending out a lighter, thinner gouache, I can just use that the next time, so I don't have to worry about it being too concentrated. This part was really all about looking at the reference photo and seeing where those lights and darks are hitting to try and play up the opacity of the highlights as much as possible without it looking more lit and more contrasty than the rest of the piece. I did learn in composition that the area you want the viewer to look should have the most contrast, and that's why this character has red hair. I felt that would be the greatest contrast to the background while still involving that pinkish tone that's in the bulk of the piece. Oddly enough, this is one of the tricks I learned from the Copic blending guide from like 2013. They talk about how it's the easiest thing to do to blend Copic markers, which are an alcohol-based marker if you've never used them, but it's easiest to blend them when there is a color group between them. So like BV, which is blue-violet, to red-violet. They all have violet in them, and it's a natural progression. And you can do that with even greater distances of color combinations, like going from a blue-violet to a red-violet to a really orangey red, because there's still that red component in there. It should work as a smooth transition. And I've used that in my work for a little bit. It's interesting to see where your learning comes from when you are primarily self-taught. But I've used that trick a few times to make sure my pieces seem like they go together and they seem harmonious without going outside of the color scheme too much, because that is something I tended not to do as a beginning artist, which ironically is when I would have most recently seen that information, but I also didn't believe color palettes were real. I thought things should be the colors they were, and that's it. And now I wish I could go back and tell my younger self, no, color palettes are awesome. Please use some color theory and design your characters and design these paintings. And then, 13-year-old me is like, no, I'm just going to make stuff the color it is, but thanks. So that's my hot tip of the day. Now I'm going in with the gel pen again and just highlighting the edges of that sans serif area. I, again, wanted to contribute to that sort of graphic abstract look with this. I don't know if that completely got there in the end. It really, I feel like, more sold it for me in the fact that the colors of the light and cast are unrealistic, but I feel like the rendering on the face is still realistic enough where I'm still in that category, which I think that's something I would keep in mind if I were to do this piece again. I might have gotten a little bit too into rendering the plants realistically, who's to say? But I'm going to finish rendering this out, and I will see you at the finished piece. just a friend of a friend. It's not what you think. When you're at the end of an end, I am all of everything. I am all of everything. I have walked 5,000 miles to find that you weren't home. And so I sent a wind away to meet you on the road. I am just a friend of a friend. It's not what you think. When you're at the end of an end, I am all of everything. I am all of everything. I'm the darkness, I'm the fog. I'm as fast as light. I'm the one who holds you close, and I'm the thing you fight. I am just a friend of a friend. It's not what you think. When you're at the end of an end, I am all of everything. I am all of everything. And here is the finished piece. I really hope you enjoyed seeing the process behind this one, and if you're interested, I do have prints of it up on my Redbubble shop. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the process down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one, alright? Bye.